26th. It's 4:30-ish. We're in the Thomas J. Smith Council Chambers. This is a work session, so if you have not been invited to speak during the council meetings, that's when we have public conversations. So we appreciate everybody's cooperation tonight. We're going to roll right downhill. We will be having mayor's awards, number 1. Number 2, it's a public hearing, consideration of a general obligation loan agreement. Hold on before we get into that one. let's go ahead and do that. Public hearing, consideration of general obligation loan and agreement of principal amount not to exceed $8,500,000. Jim?
This is for our borrowing for the projects that were in the budget, the CIP. It covers borrowing for our general street resurfacing, $1.4 million. We do a miscellaneous street rehab account with $150,000. Those are for just various projects that can come up during the course of the year that need done. Mount Pleasant Street, $4.35 million. That's anticipated to be funded back or funded through TIF funds. Central Avenue Bridge rehab, $350,000, another TIF project, and then additional flood wall money, $1.9 million for the first phase. That ended up being more than what the original project had been anticipated to be. We knew that going in last year that we'd have to have this additional borrowing occur this year. That's set to be paid for with sales tax funds. Those are all general obligation bond projects, though, so they're backed by the full faith and credit. And those are all, that's what's incorporated in the $8.5 million. We've done the background rating call with S&P. We have not received a rating back. I think they're, I don't know, the next couple of weeks we're anticipating getting a rating back. They know our schedule for actual sale isn't until the beginning of April, so they have a little bit more time to get it completed.
Questions? You guys good? Okay. Number 3, public hearing, consideration of an agreement with Burlington Community School District relative to use of Dancourt and Crapo Park tennis courts. Mr. Tisland?
This is an agreement presented by the Burlington School District for use of the tennis courts at Dancourt and Crapo in exchange for a contribution of funds towards the improvement of these courts. A little background on the courts. Previously, we had Crapo in our 5-year CIP, last year's budget, and year before for FY22. That was eliminated, or planned to be eliminated this year based on budget reductions and cuts throughout the CIP. The school approached the city, talked about a contribution towards the courts in exchange for preferred use of the courts. They're looking at their tennis courts needing work as well, and kind of uncertain future of their courts. And I guess we had discussion, felt it was appropriate to bring this forward since we do not have funds to make improvements to our courts to cover the full costs, that this would be a good partnership or for shared use of that cost, and allowing for the courts to remain in quality, safe condition going forward. So that's what was brought forward and discussed, was use agreement for the courts in exchange for a contribution of $50,000. This would be a repair, crack repair, sand and paint net posts, acrylic resurfacer of the courts at Dancourt and Crapo. Dancourt was last done in approximately 2010. These generally have a 5 to 8, 10-year time frame for repairs. Longer you go, more that cost increases. Generally, when you repair cracks, where you stop is where it picks up kind of the following season and continues to spread from that crack until it reaches the end of the court. Crapo was last updated, overlaid in the 80s, and this one is in great need of repair. If this isn't, Crapo's not done in the next few years, then that'll either need a total resurface, total overhaul, or would need to be removed. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Dancourt is in need of repairs as well. So I guess during this process, we reviewed, staff did with the school district, kind of what an agreement would be. That's what's in your packet right now. Holding up to 14 meets per year on the city tennis courts, having practice allowed between 3:30 and 5:30, Monday through Friday. Having the $50,000 contribution, they would have to provide their schedule for practice and meets by March 1st of each year. This would still allow Notre Dame to practice at the courts just after that time period, and would allow them to continue to have their meets at the courts this year and going forward in future years as well. So just looking at this is something we're kind of been contemplating with other facilities as well, these shared use agreements. We realize budgets are tight. They're going to be tight in the foreseeable future, unknowns with backfill and other things. Parks, we understand, is not the essential services or emergency services where it's a little lower priority. So we seek outside funding sources, whether it be grants or shared use agreements or other funding sources. And this was something that was brought to us as an opportunity, and we felt it was prudent to review this and feel that it's important that we have courts that are quality and safe for the community as a whole. We realize there is some impact on area schools, West Burlington, Notre Dame, that have used these in the past. There's not been a formal agreement in the past, and there's not been a cost associated with that in the past. And our concern was time frame, and then making sure they are still allowed to use those courts, especially for tournaments. There is an inconvenience factor for practice time, but that's something that is a reality for other areas as well, where there's limitation of courts or facilities. There's no courts at Notre Dame, at West Burlington Parks, West Burlington Schools. So these are the courts in the community, and how do we best utilize those? How do we best utilize our resources and funds to make those available for the public as a whole, which includes all the schools as well. So we brought this forward, reviewing our comprehensive plan and kind of these shared use agreements. Those are key points in our plan of pursuing other funding sources, making sure we're sharing resources with other agencies, other schools, especially Burlington School District, which is, again, one of the other high taxing entities in our community. So with that, if you have any questions, I can answer them. Tim Kestke and Zach Shea, the facilities supervisor and AD for Burlington Schools, are here as well, and they're the ones that we've worked with on the agreement.
Okay. Council, do we have any questions?
I do. Couple of things I guess I would ask. It concerns me that we're putting ourselves out there to the highest bidder on this agreement because there is some priority being placed as far as the practice time. So I have a concern there. The other concern I have is, we've discussed this with a couple of different people that have called, and I don't think we've ever asked Notre Dame for funds. Is that correct?
We haven't, and we
courts?
didn't ask the school district either.
I
They
know,
approached us.
and
Yep.
I appreciate the school
Yep.
district coming forward. We can work together and all use the city park, makes some sense, but there is a concern for me that we're showing a priority for one particular group at the expense of another, despite the fact that we're getting some funds to do so.
Are we okay to ask questions of people in the crowd, or?
What's that now?
Are we okay?
We want to stick to the ones that have been invited here, so Mr. Kestke and Mr. Shea.
Eric, do we know, have they come to an agreement as far as the schedule for practices?
Maybe they could address that. The schedule that had been previously agreed was 3:30 to 5 for Burlington Schools at their courts and at Dankwart, and then Notre Dame, West Burlington after that. I know there's been some concern about that after that was initially discussed with them, but they might be able to speak to that a little bit more.
And I would also say that we do have an administrator from Notre Dame here, so it'd be only right because of the other person involved. I think they ought to be able to allow, the administrator ought to be allowed
Yeah, I
to
was
speak
going
to
to
that too,
bring that up
please.
here in a moment.
So hello, I'm Zach Shea, I'm the AD at Burlington High School. So obviously we're in this situation because our tennis courts are diminishing at a fast rate, and we have a long-range plan to put in a gym where those tennis courts are. So right now, for us to put money into those tennis courts does not make sense. So we came to the city, I know Tim did, with Eric, and, they came up with this plan. And, I think that, and we're really talking about one time slot, okay? Because when this is what I understand, when Notre Dame practices there, they practice at 2 different time slots. The girls or boys first, and then the girls or boys would follow. So essentially, what we're going to do for this next year and for the foreseeable future, as far as scheduling practices, Burlington would go from 3:30 to 5:30 at Dankwart and BHS. Our girls would practice at BHS, our boys would practice at Dankwart. And then Notre Dame would then come in, and I, trying to be a good neighbor, gave them the opportunity to use our facilities at BHS to practice. So then they could come in, and typically our practices last for about an hour and a half, so you're really talking until 5 o'clock. They would be able to use Dankwart at 5, BHS at 5. So it's really that one time slot. And I broke the season down even further. So the practice can start on March 12th, okay? The last play date that Burlington has is May 8th, okay? That's 41 days. So then if you take away the away dates that Burlington would be gone from the boys' schedule, that's 7 dates. So then that takes you down to 34 practice dates that Burlington would actually be using Dankwart to practice, okay? But then our girls have 5 home dates, if you're following me here. So you gotta add those 5 dates back. All right, so that's 39 dates, okay, over the course of the entire tennis season that we're talking about. One time slot at 3:30 to 5:30 at Dankwart Park. So I believe, with us, we're making the business decision, not a donation, to have those 2 time slots at Dankwart and BHS. So that's kind of our breakdown of the scheduling. Again, like I said, we would offer Notre Dame the opportunity to come practice at BHS when need, and then when Notre Dame is practice or has a home event, Burlington will then practice at BHS. We will not use Dankwart facilities.
Questions, council, from Burlington?
How long's the tennis season? How many days?
Well, that's 41 days.
41 days.
Now, that does not include postseason, but postseason is, it's not a given that anybody's going to go to the postseason. So I put in there what we know for exact dates.
Okay.
Okay. So have you had the opportunity, or have you sat down with Notre Dame and worked out an alternating schedule, or is it the schedule where yours starts at 3:30 and then runs till 5?
That was, the one that
that's
is
still
not
the agreement?
alternating is the one that the 2 ADs sat down, came up with an agreement, and then that's how it was left.
Okay. And then, if we didn't follow through with this, are your facilities, would you still plan to continue with the facilities you have at BHS? Or what would be your plan at that point?
Well, I think if the agreement was not voted upon, I mean, we would still ask to use Dankwart.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you both. Can we hear from you, please?
I wasn't prepared for this.
Prepare yourself. You got about 3 seconds.
Okay. Contrary to what,
Tell us who you are
I'm
first,
Bill
please.
Moppin, I'm the
Further.
principal at
Thanks.
Notre Dame. We do practice all at the same time. And I talked to Pat Cohen today, and we really didn't want to bring this to this level of the city council. And I talked with him today, and we were working on an agreement on the practice. We would like to alternate weeks, simply because we have students too that have to go to work, and they need to get to work by 5. And then those students would not be able to, and not just Notre Dame students, I'm talking for West Burlington too. They would not be able to participate with the tennis program. So that's what my concern is. I know that our AD, Jeremy Swink, has worked out an agreement with the tournaments and the meets, we're fine with that. The only concern I have is we're being delegated to, this is when you guys can practice, and I just think it would be fairer for all concerned if we could just alternate that. So that's been our biggest problem and our biggest concern.
So you're saying 1 week you guys would go first, and the next week BHS would go first, okay? Or
Is that
different
with,
facilities.
is that with them paying the $50,000 though as well?
I don't, that's up to them, but they're getting priority on the meets. The way I understood it from my AD, they schedule their meets, we work around their meets. They're getting that priority. They use it on the weekends for some tournaments, I understand. Notre Dame does not. I'm just looking at, and also another thing is Wednesday nights, our kids would not be able to because we have, practices have to be done and over with at a certain time for church night.
And I hear where you're coming from. I understand what you're saying. My only question is, you're looking for equal access, but they are paying the bill on getting all the work done, so.
We're looking for a fair practice schedule, not for their meets. My AD has said he'll schedule around the meets.
Bill, do you feel like Notre Dame would be willing to work to provide any level of funding as well to go toward the facilities?
We've been talking about that, and Jeremy has to, our schedule is already set for next year, our budget. You know, we're at a certain point where this year, if you say we need this much money, we would have to fundraise to do it.
I'm really uncomfortable with that. As far as Notre Dame, one, it's a smaller school, and two, they're paying property tax just like everybody else,
No, and I understand. I mean,
right? So I
just wanted to ask the question
Do you
because,
pay property tax?
their parents do,
No, their parents, yeah.
absolutely. So I appreciate the fact that Burlington, my alma mater, came forth and said, hey, we'd like to help you with the courts, but it satisfies the needs for them. But I also don't think that we as city council can just say, well, give us the money and see you guys later. So if you guys could work out an agreement, would that make it easier on us? Yep. They are getting the priority on the meets, and also they can have the access on Saturdays, that I have a little bit of a problem where we're at right now.
I do too.
I think at this point, I would like to see you guys work out some agreement where everybody agrees. I'm in the same boat. I'm not going to be up for accepting funds and then providing any level of priority to anybody, whether they're public or private, for any public good or service or entity that we have. Now that can change, but it just, at this point in time, that's kind of where I sit. If Randy Weingart were to come forward today and say, I'll give you $500,000, but I want to have Flint Hills Golf Course every Saturday and Sunday, the answer is no. Even though we could use the money, I'm not going to take a public service or good and set it aside for anybody.
Again, this is Burlington, and everybody in Burlington should be able to play tennis. I can't, but, yeah. That's, anybody else have anything they
Now,
can add on that?
that being said, we have two schools that want to use the courts. So regardless, we're going to have to come up with an agreement where everybody can use the courts equally, of whether funds are received or not. So
But
that's
gonna have to
something,
be
you guys are going
you
to have
guys
to work that
working
out
out
in order to make that happen.
Mr.
Were you
Cohen's
gonna say,
supposed to be.
were you gonna say something down here? Did I miss you? Peanut butter? Okay. Everybody's good?
I think we need to talk a little bit about making arrangements for use of facilities for payment. We do that. You want to talk about some of the different arrangements we have?
We have arrangements for practice soccer club at the Recplex. We've been talking to them on use of our facilities there as well, increasing that cost for their preferred use of practice time on the back three courts on a Monday through Thursday basis. And these are things we're looking at. We know the Recplex is losing money every year. We know parks are not getting funded to the level that need to keep up the facilities. So where are we at as far as seeking those or promoting those or bringing those forward so that we don't have the large deficit at the Recplex, or we are able to keep our facilities funded with the tennis courts, I understand the discussion, but if we do not complete these, that cost is going to go up every year. And in 2 or 3 years, Crapo courts are going to go away if we do not do something with them. So we realize parks are not going to have the funds. We're not disputing that as far as priority over essential services and everything else. So we're trying to be creative and look for outside shared agreements, whether it's with the schools or Notre Dame or West Burlington or different agencies, the soccer club, golf as well. We have tournaments that shut down the course for an entire day because we're guaranteed to have revenue and income for that weekend where public cannot play during that time because we have a tournament, and we have tournaments quite a bit more now than we did in the past, which guarantees us revenue for those weekends, and that's something that we know is a priority for council, of creating that revenue so that we're not having these deficit accounts at the golf course or the recplex or parks in general. So,
Just for the record, I'm not mad at you.
no, so we just want to know where we should go with these things and how to bring them forward. And
And
as
I
far
think
as
that's
the
the right path to go down, Eric, is try to come up with some type of fee structure. And I hope that, my hope at this point is that the two schools can come up with an agreement that both of them are on board with, and that we can continue down this path and
Yeah.
get the courts taken care of, and everybody's happy. But if we've got a public park, I don't want to set it aside for any one entity for an extended period of time.
We've done the same with the swimming pool. We just gave a 9-month agreement.
Yeah, but we're not
The
open
difference
Nine-month
is
to
that
agreement.
The pool wouldn't have been open during those 9 months.
And we also gave them priority for all swim lessons. We gave that service to them as well. So we do these type of arrangements. You may not want to do this one specifically because of the interactions between the school districts and what's going on, but these are very much within the line of what our parks has had happen in the past.
And well, don't get me wrong, I'm very appreciative of I know you guys are scrambling on the staff. That's great. I guess my biggest issue is we're kicking one group out to put another group in because one group was already using it at that time. Now because we have some money being kicked in, sorry, but we're going to move you around. And I don't, to me, it's different if it was, okay, the courts weren't open, now all of a sudden they both came to us and said, hey, we want to use them. But you've got a long-term deal where they've used that court, and it's kind of like when we said about closing for a golf tournament. You're not going to kick one golf tournament out for another golf tournament on the same day. Typically, there's been some established priorities there, so.
Patrick, I want to hear from the city.
Oh, I just wanted to point out to the council, in case the fine print I know is difficult to discern, but there's a provision included in the contract that requires these schools to leave 2 of the courts open to the general public during use. So we were cautious about that, wanted to make sure that the public still would have access, even if they had it for sustained periods of time. And I think the theory discussed between Eric and myself when we were working on the contract was that the public then benefits from the fact that the district is willing to kick in these funds, upgrade these courts, and then, of course, the public can continue to use them just as the schools do, which was part of the thinking, is to upgrade our facilities. If the district had the money and were willing to give it, it would be helpful to everybody, so.
Can you state who you are too, just for?
I apologize. Patrick O'Connell, city attorney. I'm only here because I worked on the contract and know what it says, so.
Thank you.
And he was here for a previous reason, so.
That's just my only point too, is from a parks perspective, we want these courts open to the public. And if we're not able to upgrade them, then are we going to be able to have these open to the public in a quality, safe capacity, whether it's this year or next year or down the road? And that's what our goal is. Regardless, with the schools, we want these courts available all the other times, which is other than these 2 or 4 hours, Monday through Friday for a month and a half or 2 months. And if we're not able to upgrade them this year, it's going to cost more next year, and where are we going to get these funds down the road? So
One thing I'd say is I almost feel like we're just probably 10 months or 8 months at least early on this agreement. I mean, we haven't even touched the courts yet, and we won't until late this year. I feel like, this is something that, a lot of things can change between now and then. If we're able to do all the courts out there, I went out and looked, I took the opportunity, I went to every tennis court in town. I would agree that they are the nicest, but they do need some work, but there are other courts in the community as well that aren't too far off. But at the end of the day, I think we could probably push this down the road a little bit, see what the two schools can come up with. and then approach this after the courts have been refinished or when they've been redone, or what we're gonna do there after the tennis season. And this year, just work out an agreement to share the courts, on an equal basis.
I'd like to see the the school districts work something out. That's what I would love to see. Again, we're a community together, so let's find a way to make it happen. But again, I just want to reiterate, we're not stifling you, my friend. You're doing exactly what we want you to do,
Exactly.
so know that. Okay, are we good going forward now,
Just
council?
one other quick note on, not to belabor, to do tennis courts this fall, we'd need to enter into some agreement probably in the next couple months to do that, which we'd need to know we have funds to do that, just based on the timing. We have a rep coming on Monday to look at the courts, to go over what that would be, so we could start to get bids. So if we're looking at having them ready for next season, we need to know that we're gonna have funds this fall to do that this fall. Otherwise, it's gonna be another tennis season that it's delayed. So just as far as timing wise, and I
I'd
know.
say it gives them a couple of months to work out something, and then we can tackle this again after they've had a chance to sit down and work through this.
Council, you guys are good?
No further questions right now?
Okay.
And, sorry, and sorry to keep delaying this. We don't have an agreement with either school. If they don't come to an agreement, we don't have an agreement with Notre Dame, West Burlington. We never have, other than just, yeah, you can use our courts, there's no other use. If both of them want to use our courts and there's no agreement, or they can't come to agreement, I guess we want these courts for the public, but how that is going to function is kind of up in the air, so. I mean, technically, they're public courts, there's no agreements, whoever gets there. I mean, I don't want to create these issues, which, these are just concerns we have as staff.
This hasn't been something that we had to look at.
Yeah.
I mean, this has been a 30-year arrangement that's been in place, but never a formal agreement in place.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that we, from a staff perspective, looked at it or considered the fact that we didn't have a formal agreement in place. What Eric is getting at is no one is guaranteed a court at this point.
Okay.
You don't have a formal agreement to allow anyone to formally have a spot.
We're good?
Good for now?
Eric?
I think that's it for now. I just want to make sure everyone's clear and get everything out there so that we can have those thoughts and discussions.
Appreciate the work, Eric.
And we appreciate those that came tonight.
It also
to-
points out, as we've gone through this, do we have a formal agreement out at the golf course for the use,
At the golf course?
for the schools?
No.
And that's another issue that we are going to have to come up with as we've gone through this topic. Just realize that these
Have we
are
had
things
issues
that
with the golf course in the past?
No, we just don't have a formal.
we don't have a
use
formal agreement for them to take over use of the facility.
Sounds like we've got some work to do just to get our end caught up
Yeah.
before we start diving into a bunch of stuff, so.
Are we good? And thank you all for coming tonight. We certainly appreciate you. And if you want to get on out of here, you're definitely welcome to do that at this time. Which brings us to number 4. As a consideration of an ordinance rezoning the property locally known as 333 Curran Street from R2 Single Family Residential to C1 Limited Commercial Zoning District. It's going to be the first reading on that one. Mr. Tislin?
This went to the Planning Commission on January 16th and was recommended to the City Council 4-1 to recommend approval of the requested rezoning. The recommendation was based on the desired use of the property for limited commercial location adjacent to existing arterial and collector roadways and nearby surrounding neighborhood mixed uses. There is a hair salon just one block over, a church to the east, and other commercial uses, gas station along Agency. Okay, the wrong button there. There is a large open area to the north that could be considered commercial in the future. I think a church owns it now, but generally these areas, these prime corner areas are considered for commercial use. It currently is low-density residential on the future land use map, as are the other commercial areas. We would recommend changing that to a neighborhood mixed use, which allows low-density commercial uses. The no vote from the planning commission was based on, they just didn't have a formal use at this time for the site. The owner wants to market it as a commercial site, and then access, which would be during the site plan review, if this was rezoned and they submitted something, we'd have control over access through the site plan process, making sure they have proper access, whether they upgrade the alley entrance or something else, as well as off-street parking adequate to what the site is. So if it is rezoned, any use at the site does still have to meet all our current zoning code items, which include setback, parking, access, architectural design, buffering between residential uses. So those are handled through our zoning process, but staff felt this was an appropriate rezoning request and was recommended by the planning commission.
Questions for Mr. Tislin?
Is that just a house and a garage on there now?
Currently, there is a house in the
Yes.
garage. They have gotten their demo permit to remove that, which will be a good process. It has been an ongoing nuisance property for quite some time. It had been sold on contract, and the contract seller recently repossessed and got the property back, and he is demolishing the structure, which will take care of quite a bit of our nuisance time, luckily, so that'll be a good improvement for that area.
So did I hear you right? There's nothing specifically listed to go in there. They just want to be able to market it?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
And we've touched base with all the homeowners
We
to
send
the
notice to
south
everyone
of
within
that?
200
and
feet.
across? Okay.
Yep, yep.
Good.
I'm good.
Good.
Number 5 is consideration of an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances of the City of Burlington, Iowa by amending provisions pertaining to the standard penalty applicable to certain sections of the code and violations thereof. First reading on that.
Before you go to that, back on yours, Eric, staff doesn't recommend a change that is,
Does, I'm sorry.
Does.
Yeah.
okay.
Did I, sorry if I said that
On
wrong.
number 3,
Yeah.
on number 4?
I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
You said planning commission doesn't because.
Planning
they-
commission
4-1
does.
doesn't, because
4 to
they
1
didn't
does
have-
approve. The
4 to 1.
one no vote was based on their concern that they didn't have a plan.
Okay.
But the 4 that voted in favor of it were supportive of
Yeah,
it.
I think he misspoke and said
I'm
doesn't
sorry.
when his phone, when his computer blew up.
Yeah.
Understandable. So, yeah.
Big Chief.
Yeah, just briefly, we had kind of talked about this in the past with the indigent defense bill, and we had removed imprisonment from the simple misdemeanor section. Well, in essence, at least locally, or how that's viewed locally is those all would become municipal infractions, which really complicates the system for us. So in getting with Patrick and working our way through this, we're going to add the imprisonment back in, but the more important part is the sentence at the end. However, any award of imprisonment under this section shall be imposed only upon the express request of the city's prosecutor representative. So what we're saying there is if there's going to be imprisonment and if you have to have defense, then what we're going to do, or what the county attorney has talked to us about doing, is just amending that to a state code, essentially, and then that changes the burden. But trying to get these cases prosecuted, like I said, just locally, this has worked in other counties, but locally, it was kind of a problem. So rather than do that, this will take care of our needs and then some. It was going to get kind of complicated if it stayed a municipal infraction. So we're really just adding a sentence back to the ordinance.
Questions?
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Yeah.
Your Honor,
Yes, sir.
can I comment on that briefly?
Please do.
The code, our Lynch Dallas is responsible for this fiasco. Essentially, I talked with the city manager, and he had the same concerns I did. The League of Cities also pointed it out. The reason why we had to make these changes initially is because we were going to get tagged with paying criminal defense costs on all these city tickets we were writing. We didn't want to do that, so we took out the possibility of jail time. The rest of our code, but it was only on certain offenses, and the language still existed, that all of the offenses that the county attorney was being asked to prosecute for us, that she had criminal cog over, were still characterized as criminal violations. But she didn't see it that way. When I discussed it with her, she saw it differently. So I'll take full responsibility. I mean, we were just trying to protect the city, and it's worked every place else that I'm aware of. I've even talked to several city managers elsewhere, and they're not having any issues. But our county attorney did have some issues. She didn't feel that she was legally allowed to prosecute those because they were characterized, or some of them were anyway, as municipal infractions. I pointed out the language elsewhere in the code that said only some of these are going to be considered municipal infractions. Most of the things she's prosecuting are still defined exactly the same way. She didn't like that, so what we did was we just went back, as the chief explained, and just added one sentence that says, no jail time unless we ask for it. There's still a risk that the judge would say, well, it's my call. And they might still appoint a prosecutor or a defense lawyer, and you might still have to pay for it. So
Hey, we'll take that, though. We'll take that. You're getting close.
I do apologize. We were just trying to do the right thing, save everybody money. And
No apologies needed there. You guys, questions?
Good?
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Patrick, for the clarification. Next, we have number 6, consideration of 2018 amendment to urban renewal plan for Burlington Consolidated Urban Renewal Area related to use of incremental property tax revenues for public improvements.
So, a couple of steps that go along the way of adding projects to be funded with TIF funds. We had to have a meeting, a combined meeting with, where we had at least provided invitations to the county and the school to hear what projects we were looking at potentially funding with TIF dollars. The school district did make it to that meeting. The projects that are being added that were not previously already included in our urban renewal plan included the Central Avenue bridge repairs for $350,000, doing the adaptive signalization on Roosevelt, and then Broadway extension out by the adjacent to the Recplex. The final 2 of those projects are on next year's CIP plan. They are not on this year's. But we're getting them added now at the same time while we're doing this amendment process. We'd anticipate if we're moving forward with those projects, it would be next year's financing, next March, where we'd be doing the borrowings on those. But this urban renewal amendment, if approved by the council, would add the ability to fund the 3 projects with TIF funds.
Questions? We're not funding them with any other funds.
No, we don't have other funds to do it.
We have no fundage.
That's right. You guys good?
What will that put our TIF max at? Where would we be at then?
What do you mean? What's your question
The
about?
total amount of money that we can spend on the TIF increment is it 10 million?
TIF, we bring in about $2.5 million annually in TIF revenues. So
5 years out, or?
So you can borrow, on a TIF project, technically, depending on the project and what you're doing, you can have projects that are financed, if they're facilities, or infrastructure, you'll see 20, 25-year projects in some cases. We do not do that. All of our projects, well, the majority of our projects, I can't say all, are on about a 12-year funding basis to be paid off on. All of these are on that type of schedule. I think we were looking at some interest-only payments on maybe the Mount Pleasant Street Bridge. I can't remember which project was listed that way over the first couple of years. Again, when we started working on our financing position as a community back in 2012, we had a lot of backloaded debt that went out to FY 21, 22 timeframe before you got to the end of a cliff of all our bond borrowings. TIF is in that same shape, so we have a little bit less resources over the first couple of years, but we have very adequate resources moving forward in the out years.
You guys good?
Good.
All right. We're up to number 7, public hearing consideration of plans and specs for the 2018 Agency Street widening project, East End. Mr. Mack.
Hello. Next week, you'll have the engineering firm that designed it, V&K, did the design plans on this project here. This is a conceptual map. It was early on in the project, so it doesn't look exactly like it looks like today. I would say 95% of it looks like that. There's a center turn lane for Legacy Drive and the parking lot to the north where traffic can access it from Agency turning left on it. But this project entails from Roosevelt to Melrose Court or Montrose Court. Melrose.
Melrose.
Just east of the new agency, or gas station there. This project is estimated at $1.8 million. With engineering, it takes up to about 1.9, so we still have inspection left to do on that. We haven't decided exactly how we're going to do that project. But this is funded through TIF, and $500,000 of TSIP, which is Traffic Safety Improvement Funds from the DOT. We will be tearing out the median there, and then doing some lights as well. So this has got a full-fledged traffic control plan, and it also will overlap with some of the construction that's on Agency West. So the way that this construction will be done, they will tear out the medians just adjacent to Roosevelt. There's some medians there. They'll tear that out, and then they'll put asphalt back, send traffic down the middle of it so they can go and widen it. Fortunately, you're not able to widen it. You have to go to the wider parameters and then work in. And so they'll tear them out and then put another product back so they can send traffic down it. They'll do that in one of two sections, and Jason will probably be able to explain this better than I can. There'll be certain driveways that'll be blocked off at certain times. We realize that we can't shut off all access when we're widening. So then we'll widen on one section and then turn around and do the next section of widening, and shut the other intersections down. I think the first ones being shut down are Legacy Drive, all these entrance, Hy-Vee's middle entrance, and so then that'll flip and that'll shut the intersection down, and then the other driveways. So it'll be a lot of coordination here. There's a lot of traffic in these areas for commercial purposes, but luckily there are other avenues to access. So once they widen the road, then they'll go back in and they'll tear up the middle section, and then they'll place it back. And then all new traffic lights are being installed at Columbus and Agency. And then it'll be a center turn lane throughout the whole process until it tapers back at the very east edge of the boundary. So the other thing that's going into play with this project is we are still not done with Agency on the west side of Roosevelt. If you would throw up some of those maps to show what we have left. This traffic control should end as the other part begins. Luckily, we have a little bit of break in weather, so hopefully we can start working here soon. But you can see this is the West Burlington Agency intersection. So what we will do is we'll have them work on the inside lanes first on this intersection because they don't need to widen the intersections at all. So they'll work on that, and so access will be blocked for traffic northbound and southbound. They will not be able to go directly through that intersection. It'll be right in and right out only for this part of the construction. And so then they will flip from the inside lanes, once that's complete, to the outside. This is where traffic is really restricted. Not only is northbound, southbound not allowed through those roads, but then right in and right out will also be restricted. There's some frontage roads in these areas. We can't tell traffic to use them because they are private frontage roads, but people will find the path of least resistance rather than going and using Broadway as their detour or Roosevelt. So this is kind of the game plan for this project. This will probably take about 2 months, where Agency will take about 5.
This starts when?
This project, as soon as the weather breaks and the contractor feels comfortable going back in there, they will probably start pretty soon. You'll probably see them start doing some sidewalk all the way to the edge.
Essentially.
I would hope that they could start doing some of that work now. The driveway I don't know what else to refer to as the Jimmy John's Perkins driveway, that intersection will be one of the first ones worked on because, as you can tell, there's a little bit of limitation on access for left-hand turns in there and right in, right out. So they'll try and knock that one out first and then go back to the intersection. So Agency Street will be, well, not only that, West Burlington is asphalt overlaying from West Burlington Avenue all the way out to Gear. So we're going to have 2.5 solid miles of construction this summer on Agency Street.
Yeah, needs to be done. I got a question for you on the east side. Is there any concern on staff's part about, because Hy-Vee has kind of effectively moved that traffic point from
Correct.
Columbia to further east?
I do have a map of that. If you want to, you're talking about the east entrance off
Yeah.
Melrose at the gas station?
Yeah, because they kind of moved that. So now, I didn't know if there's a concern down the road for traffic because of the turn lane there.
Oh,
There- we
expanding
can't
the turn
we
lane
can't-
because
yeah, we can't
because
put
that's
it-
kind of where the taper is.
Right.
I think that the biggest thing is for right-hand turns, you're going to be able to turn right off onto Melrose.
Mm-hmm.
It would be the left-hand turn that would be concerning. As the taper continues, I mean, we could look at extending that further, but we'd have to end up widening a little
John,
bit further
John
than
brings
that.
up a good point, because you're gonna have two lanes merging together at that point, plus you're gonna have people trying to turn left at that same, and they have really created, that's
They
their
have created,
main
yeah,
entry
they have created
and
that,
exit
that's the
control
new
point
entrance.
in that parking lot at this point, so.
I'm trying to understand what you're saying, two lanes.
People aren't using the Columbia turn as much because when they put in the convenience store, now they're going further south, or further east, I'm sorry, I got my directions mixed up. So my concern is if we're tapering there, if we're funneling traffic, and also there's still gonna be people making that left turn. Because they've kind of moved, I didn't know if we've done any look at if we've looked at it, it looks to me like traffic, I'm there unfortunately all the time. It looks to me like we've moved that turn point if you're heading east, a little further east, beyond the Columbia.
I would say that the traffic light is probably the people's biggest concern right now because it is not very easy to use. I think
Okay.
the improvements to the traffic light should bring people towards that to try and make left-hand turns. If you want to, could you bring up I have a map of what we're doing at that intersection of Columbia or Columbus.
Yeah, my only concern there, Nick, was whether we were taping it too early
Yeah.
because of the traffic flow, because that traffic flow's kind of changed.
You want to zoom in on that? Towards the top left.
I only want to do it once.
I think one of the biggest concerns that I've seen for traffic control is the lack thereof in the parking lot north of Agency. Hy-Vee did a pretty good job of trying to funnel that traffic in their new lanes that they created. But you still have a lot of scattering effect and then the limits on the amount of stacking that you can have trying to go southbound out of that intersection. And so what we've done is we've created kind of an island similarly to the one that's shaped on the east side of the intersection, further north, to try and bring that traffic that's going eastbound in the parking lot further
I gotcha.
north.
Okay,
And trying to allow for a little more stacking.
Stacking, yeah.
okay.
I mean, ideally, we would try and go in there and put a frontage road in there with medians, but, I mean, it's not our property.
Yeah,
But I think this should help at least.
So are you moving a light further east then as well, or we're not adding a light,
No,
we're just
the
replacing?
light's staying there. No, we're not adding any lights either.
okay.
You guys good?
And any further, like, detailed questions you have, Michael, or Jason will be here next week.
Okay, cool.
Could you put up the original drawing that you had on there? The entrance off of Columbia, or to the west.
To the west.
That's east.
I'm sorry.
That's
to
what
the-
goes into the gas station.
Go to the
Oh,
west.
the west.
So that Legacy Drive there, Nick, is that the current configuration where you're not allowing any
That is,
left-hand turns?
this is a conceptual map. This is the best map that I could have that you could throw on the screen all at one time. I have a lot of other maps that have segments of what it looks like. So that's not the way that it'll look. There'll be left-hand turn access off of Agency to both Legacy and to the north.
Okay.
And you will also be able to turn left out of Legacy and as well as the parking
Good.
lot.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Man, I can't wait till that gets done.
Yeah, no
Okay.
kidding.
it'll be some headache during the process, but I think it'll be well worth it.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Nick.
Stephanie, come on down. Number 8, public hearing consideration of fiscal year 2018-2019 budget.
So Eric's going to put up what was published in the paper last Wednesday, February 21st. This is just showing that the property tax rate's staying the same, what we're going to certify with the county. Next week, I'll have a PowerPoint presentation to go over general points of the budget. So, any questions?
You guys good?
I'm good.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Steph. Okay, now we move to the proposed consent. Number 1 is a resolution approving final acceptance and final payment for the 2017 erosion mitigation at the corner of North Street and North 4th Street. Mr. McGregor? You're excused.
This resolution finals out the project at 4th and North Street. As you may remember, there was a water or a rain event that was pretty significant and caused some erosion damage to the hillside of 4th and North, kind of the corner there. So what we had done with this project was a soil nail project where a contractor went in and drilled pipes. It was steel rod for the lack of, and then they got it into the rock, and then they used the mesh to hold the soil together. The project is done. There's some debate on the sidewalk that is not in compliance right now, but the contractor is not the one to be held at fault, so we will final it out with the contractor and have a conversation with the design firm that did that. So we will try and make that right. But the total project cost was $249,500, paid for out of miscellaneous sewer rehab funds, and I think road use. No, just for sewer rehab.
Which one? I'm not even paying attention.
4th
to.
and North,
Not that that's anything new. That is.
especially when I talk.
Somebody
about
wake
it.
up the city manager.
Figures on that.
Somebody wake him up.
Straight out of sewer.
It was sewer rehab funds.
You guys good?
And even at this year, the sewer rehab needs to have a transfer. I see we didn't do a first half transfer on that. I think it was set to do, it might have been, it's either 5 or 700,000, 500,000 out of the sewer fund. So it's really being funded out of general sewer revenues.
Just the line item that it came from.
You guys good?
Yes.
Okay. Number 2, stay right where you are, my friend, just for a minute. Now, number 2, I'm just gonna do number 2 through number 9, and then you can address them, okay?
Okay?
The first was resolution approving the purchase of a temporary construction easement for 3200 Agency Street for the 2018 Agency Street widening project, which are all of these. The second is an easement for 3120 Agency Street. Number 4 is an easement for 3135 Agency Street, all at the widening project. Number 5 is for 3140 Agency Street. Number 6 is for 3150 Agency Street. Number 7 is for 3155 Agency Street. Number 8 is for 3220 Agency Street. And number 9 is for 3245 Agency Street for the 2018 Agency Street widening project, East End. Mr. Mack.
Yes, all these easements are for the Agency Street project. As we widen, we need to do a little bit of right-of-way for temporary purposes and for permanent purposes. The memo that you received is incorrect. We are not spending just $2,595. As I was sitting in the back reading through the material that I obviously published with my name on the top, we have a permanent easement of $540. The permanent easements and all the information on the dollar figures that are spent are all contained within the easements resolution documentation. So there's an easement that says the compensation amount and then it has a description for it. It's the memo that doesn't describe the full dollar figures that we're paying for each one. So the resolutions I think are fine and all the information behind the resolutions. It's just the memo that doesn't detail out the overall sum that we're paying. So I don't know the dollar figures that I'm talking about here versus what easement that it is, but it's a total of about $6,500 for easements. And I will have a better detailed answer for you in the packet for next week. That'll be correct,
Okay.
so,
You guys have,
Can't do it without it, right?
correct.
you guys good?
Yes,
Good.
thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. That brings us to number 10, resolution of support for the Workforce Housing Tax Incentive Program project by Park West LLC. Mr. Tisland?
This was being submitted by Dan Cahill for his project that was recently discussed, approved, the Park West subdivision. Did have this in the packet, did send to the IEDA for a review just to make sure it meets their requirements, and did get some word back that they are currently undergoing some changes for the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program. They're not accepting applications currently. They're going to be changing applications from first come, first serve continuous basis to a competitive one. And the guidelines have not yet been established. So Would recommend probably approval of this, just if it does meet the requirements, once they establish those, they can submit this, but this may have to come back and change if they do drastically change those tax credits. So just found out about that later Thursday afternoon. So unfortunately, that could delay or change some of the things with our workforce housing tax credits that some developers are wanting to do.
Questions, council?
But I guess for this resolution, again, in general, what the workforce housing tax credit program was for projects that don't exceed $200,000 per unit for new construction. If they build 4 within a 3-year time frame, they can qualify for investment tax credit up to 10% of the investment directly related to construction based on the first $150,000 of value. Those tax credits are transferable, and then a refund of state sales, service, and use taxes. So it encourages that moderate-priced home with incentive through the state, which is within the price point, I think, that were desired through that housing study, but we'll see, I guess, where this goes with the state.
Are they gonna go up with the 200,000?
He said the guidelines are being discussed and they haven't been established, and
Okay.
that was
I'll
basically
be
it.
interested to see what they look
So,
like.
yeah. So unfortunately, it just kind of changed right in the middle of
Yeah.
his process.
You guys good?
Yes.
All right. Number 11, resolution approving a gift agreement for property located east of 1230 to 1308 North 6th Street, Burlington, Iowa. Mr. Tisland?
This is the property located behind those properties at 1203 to 1308 North 6th. Here highlighted in yellow, has been owned by Steve Hoth, now is in his estate. The city owns the properties adjacent to it, highlighted in black, here and here down to Bluff Road, and then the cemetery is here to the south of it. As they've gone through the state and had some discussions with some local individuals, they've discussed gifting that to the city. This is the site, I guess, of Black Hawk Rock, as kind of through some history research. Russ Fry is kind of the leader of this group that's done a lot of research and written some books on it. But I guess based on his research, it was a location where Chief Black Hawk stood on that rock overlooking the river and gave one of his final speeches before going into battle. And
Just for the record, I stood on that rock too.
Did you?
So I just want that known.
Before you went into battle.
No, I wouldn't want to battle.
The school district, through the high school, they'd done some cleanup on that in the last couple of years during Earth Day, trying to recover the site. This is kind of a historical picture of the site here at the bottom. And then, I know it's hard to see, but this is the rock as it is today, a lot of silting in. And the goal from this program is just to get it recognized through the National Register as the historic rock that they believe it is, going through that process, and then seeking funds through archaeological groups or researchers to maybe do some excavation to clean up the site. We wouldn't make it a public site until access is found to that site. It is a very difficult access site. So at this time, the only plans would be to try and recognize it and preserve it, and then see if something opens up down the road where access could be given to the site, but we wouldn't allow that public access at this time until a safe alternative is there.
We could all park in Jim's driveway, right?
I
The
thought
driveway that
some-
goes from the curb
some
to the
consideration
sidewalk.
was
Right
being given
across
to
the
moving
street.
the rock. No?
No, I don't believe so.
All right. So I said at my house. Okay. You guys good? Good. All right, we've got some public hearings set for March 19th. The first is consideration of a lease agreement with the Moyne County Humane Society for the use of a facility at 2000 North Roosevelt Avenue. Second is consideration of plans and specs for the 2018 parking lot improvements. C is consideration of plans and specs for the 2018 Mount Pleasant Street HMA overlay. And the last is consideration of a transit grant application. So we've got that fund coming up. Discussion items, we have, our attorney is here for the primer on council procedures and laws applicable to council conduct. Mr. O'Connell.
As you know, I'm Patrick O'Connell. I am one of the attorneys at Lynch Dallas PC, who is the city attorney for the city of Burlington. In speaking with Mr. Furno, we were working on upgrading the council manual, revising the council manual to include essential items. It's very, very outdated. It still references council members who aren't here, rules that we no longer follow, things that aren't accurate anymore. And while we were doing that, it occurred to us that it would make sense for me to do this, since we do have, I believe, 3 of you are serving for the first time. Is that right?
Absolutely.
So there are some issues that I run into all the time, which I thought would be helpful, and which are partially included in the handbook you currently have, and which would certainly be included in the new one we are revising. Do any of you have access to the current 2018 Municipal Leaders Handbook, which the League of Cities prepares? Fantastic. My firm edits that every year. We're asked to do that. I would highly recommend that you get it and keep it handy, because it's not going to give you the answer to everything, but it's definitely going to give you an excellent initial guidance for most of the issues that come up. At least it'll point you in the right direction, so that you can ask intelligent questions from there. We want to make the rules and procedures manual for the council to be a useful document rather than an outdated one, and so we're working toward that. And Jim has mentioned to me there are several issues that he would like included, which I agree should be included, that are more, I guess I should say, ways to keep the council out of any sort of legal trouble, as well as practical guidance for the council, and as well as basic local rules which will help us all get along well, be effective, and do the things the right way. First, I want to point out, normally, in cities where the city attorney is present at all of the council meetings, we have, for many reasons over the years, not done that. We, primarily fiscal, we don't have the city attorney present. Normally, the city attorney acts as parliamentarian. In this case, we have a fairly experienced mayor who runs the meetings very efficiently, but your general goal is always to use some form of Robert's Rules of Order, even if you don't adopt it formally. But the one footnote I would give you before you begin is Robert's Rules of Order is not, including local rules that may incorporate Robert's Rules of Order, are not a death warrant. If you pass an ordinance that is otherwise legal under Iowa law, because I've seen this argument made, but you didn't do it exactly pursuant to Robert's Rules of Order, the mayor didn't recognize someone's objection, someone's point of order, whatever it is, that does not void the law. You look to state law for ordinances and resolutions approving contracts and things like that. So I would point that out first of all. I would recommend that the council adopt Robert's Rules of Order as its general guideline, but that we include some substantive exceptions to that basically state the mayor who runs the meeting, or whoever the presiding officer happens to be if the mayor's not present, will generally follow Robert's Rules of Order, but if there's a good faith error, it's not going to void an otherwise legal action of the city council. In terms of rule enforcement, it's obviously the mayor's prerogative to run the meeting. The individual who is the presiding officer may run the meeting, and I don't think I've seen this happen here in Burlington before, but we have the right to clear the room, and we have the right to control the room. And we don't need to talk about this evening, but there are some suggested rules of conduct. There's some pretty good ones, actually, in the existing manual. And I know we've had this discussion before, Your Honor, about what should we do about unruly conduct. But that's one thing to keep in mind, that council members who don't believe the meeting are being controlled can make what's called a point of order and request that the rules be followed. If the mayor doesn't recall, or the mayor, it hasn't occurred to him yet to do anything, there's what's called a point of order. And under Robert's Rules of Order, you would simply state, point of order, I believe the council rules require X. I would ask that that be done. And he might actually appreciate that if you did, if it hadn't occurred to him that that was going on. There are a lot of procedural rules we could talk about. I don't really want to labor them at length. But oftentimes, not being familiar with Robert's Rules of Order makes it difficult sometimes to get your point across and to do it in an orderly way. And so what we'll try to do in this manual is provide some pointers on at least the basics basic rules that are effective, that work well. Let's talk a little bit about the council in general, and how it operates through the staff. Especially for those of you that don't have a lot of experience yet in city government. One thing that works very effectively is to work through the city manager and make sure the city manager is in the loop with more or less everything you're trying to accomplish. If you as an individual have received a complaint, for example, about the city staff, what works best in our experience is that you always route those complaints of the citizen through the city manager. Because if there is an issue, let's say Mr. Tisland is off the reservation, he's doing something he shouldn't be doing,
Say it ain't so.
All the time, every
you
day.
know, going to Eric and reading him the riot act and Jim doesn't know about it is probably going to create a lot of problems, because Eric actually works for Jim, and it's Jim's responsibility to handle that situation. But it's even more critical with public policy issues. If you have an opinion about a public policy issue that's coming up on the agenda, always bring that to the city manager ahead of time. That will oftentimes, it'll eliminate a lot of train wrecks at the public meeting itself if you do. And oftentimes, we get so excited as public servants, we forget. We're excited about an issue, we're ready to talk about it in public, and we don't ask the right questions ahead of the meeting. And if you do, Jim might say, well, hold on a second, here's something you need to read. And it may change your position entirely. So,
Can you think of an
it's
example?
It's a common problem.
Can you think of
that
an
we see.
example? I'm kind of an example kind of gal.
For example, let's say, for instance, the staff works really hard on an ordinance that they're going to pass, and they have a lot of information about that, and some citizen approaches you and says, Councilmember Murray, I'm really irritated about this ordinance because, and they give you some reasons. And Jim has got a very detailed understanding of the ordinance, and he understands that those concerns could easily be addressed by looking at section whatever it is of the ordinance. What I've seen happen many times is a council member will take 10 minutes of council time pounding the table about how we shouldn't pass this ordinance, only to have the city manager or the city administrator say, but section 90.26 says that that's not the case because we can't do that. There's an exception here that covers that person's exact concerns. And now you've made a table pounding speech that was impassioned, and you actually feel foolish because the ordinance doesn't really say what you thought it said or something like that. I've seen that happen numerous times. Or the staff has put before you a policy they want to pass, and it's detailed and it's got a lot of things in it that are important for you to read very carefully. But you may not understand exactly what it says. You think it means one thing, and the staff says, well, no, the reason we use that language is because there's a history to this, that we've been here these guys have been around a while, they remember, and so they used language from 5 years ago that references a particular issue that you may not be familiar with. If you ask the city manager ahead of the meeting, this is what I intend to say, here's what I'm concerned about, he might say, well, wait a second, here's the reason why that's rooted that way. And you might say, oh. I mean, just the other day, I saw a council member who was extremely concerned about the reasons why we were spending a certain amount of money. But he asked, I walked into City Hall, and there he was asking the finance director about it ahead of the meeting, and he ended up not asking any questions about it at all. And it worked out really well. And I realize this may be just common sense, but it's when we're policy advocates, we forget these things, that the staff often has a grip on details that you need. And sometimes not everything they know is in the memo. They just have to do their best at trying to summarize for you what they think you're going to think is vitally important.
And
So,
can I throw in too,
Yeah.
just that it's not good to be sucker punched. And I don't want anybody coming in here trying to sucker punch the city manager, let him know what's going on beforehand. To
Right.
me, it's just bad business to bring in something at the last minute. You're better off letting somebody know, letting staff know, instead of bringing something at the last minute at a meeting when Jim, the city manager, doesn't even know anything about it. So everybody's got time, you can make time to do that. Just had to throw that in there, go ahead.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, Your Honor. And what I was about to say ties right directly into that. When you're irritated with a staff member, the wrong place to point that out is in the council meeting. Remember, the city staff, they have no power. They work for you. They can't say anything. They're not going to be able to say, oh, I did my best. You know, they're just going to hang their heads and be very upset and embarrassed. And I don't, you all seem like extremely nice people who would never do that, but I've seen it many times. It's like the staff person's at the microphone and they're trying to explain why they brought something forward, and they're getting just cross-examined and made to look terrible. And I think you did a terrible job and you haven't done your due diligence, and the poor person is standing there and, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, council member. The best way to handle that, if somebody has really goofed up, spent money inappropriately, maybe they went beyond the authority of the policy, maybe they said something inaccurate in a report, is to bring that to Mr. Furno and let him discuss it directly. Or you can even sit down with Mr. Furno and the staff member outside the meeting and by all means read them the riot act and get it done. But doing it in a public meeting doesn't go over well. And even politically, it doesn't go over well. And so I'm just relating, one of the things I'm putting in the suggested manual is not to do that, and a possible way to deal with staff issues that, because you want the material brought forward in an accurate way. It's not personal, and you want to be effective as leaders, and that's the best way to do it. A couple things about the city attorney, all right? I represent the city. I shouldn't say I, my entire law firm does. I rely on a lot of smart folks here. Jim can tell you that, we rely on finance counsel as well outside Lynch Dallas. But one thing we appreciate is that if we are legally adverse to someone out in town who has retained counsel, what do they always do, right? Do you think they just talk to their lawyer and then their lawyer calls the city attorney? Oh, no. They call you folks, don't they? They're going to be like, Councilmember Billups, I have a problem. And they won't tell you, of course, they have an attorney and they're already suing us or they're already threatening to sue us. They won't do that. And they'll want you to get involved and get in the middle of it. And what do? You're like, I'm a public servant. I have to be responsive. I can't just ignore this person. They're obviously very upset. You take all these notes and you tell them things. And then you talk to Jim, and Jim says, we have a lawsuit going on. And that's what you said is contrary to what the city attorney has advised, and it's contrary to what we're doing in the case. And you're, oh. So then you have to go back to him and say, listen, never mind what I said. Talk to your attorney and have your attorney call the city attorney.
Why is everybody looking at me?
I picked on you. I apologize.
Thanks for using me as an example. I appreciate it.
It's going to happen to all of you if it hasn't already. It's just going to happen. And I'm just, and so the first question I recommend you ask is, do you have a lawyer? Are you considering legal action? Who's your attorney? Find out who their attorney is and say, well, listen, because you have an attorney, I tell you what, have your attorney call Pat O'Connell at Lynch Dallas. Here's his telephone number. Better yet, have him call Jim and let Jim decide what he wants to do. Because that way, we can all be on the same page, And different times I've even said, well, Councilmember Billups, why don't I come to Burlington? We'll sit down with their attorney and this person and we'll try to figure out their problem. And we'll bring Jim to the meeting and we'll try to figure this problem out with the attorney present, if they have an attorney. Because it's not really right that they're lawyered up and you're not. That's just, there's a lot of reasons why that's not a good idea. The priority of business. I know that the mayor is well aware of this, but you may not be. Your agenda is also not a death warrant, okay? You can't put things on the agenda and talk about them if they're not on the agenda. I think you all probably know that. But one thing I would point out is that it's definitely feasible to reorder the order of the agenda. For example, the mayor looks out in the audience and notices there's 3 people here from a particular business or something, and they really have something they need to say, and their agenda item is way back in the agenda. And the mayor realizes, well, it's going to be 2 hours at this rate before we get to them. He can say, look, I'm going to take an item out of order, and that's not improper. You're not violating the open meetings law by changing the order. As long as you're not changing what's on there by adding something, that's fine. So, just keep that in mind, as occasionally I've seen that happen, where somebody's sitting there until 10 o'clock at night, waiting to talk, and then the council meeting ends because they say, we're out of time, and we're just, we have a rule, and we end. Thank you, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't think you were.
That's a gut punch, man.
Yeah, it's a gut punch, and so,
That's as Jason sitting back there.
Yeah.
We're gonna let Jeremy talk first, but anyways.
remember also that remarks have to be germane to the item under consideration. What happens every time, right? The train of thought that you have, it's a stream of consciousness. You're thinking about one thing, and the next thing you know, you want to start talking about the budget. Pretty soon, a 10-minute discussion occurs about a budget item that's not on the agenda. Who knows what you've just done? Those guys in the press know. They're going to say, where was this on the agenda? Why are we having a debate about an item that wasn't on the agenda? So you have to watch that. It's particularly important when you go into closed session. 21.51C, matters in litigation, for instance. Okay? Those folks in the press, they dutifully walk out, and they know that they can't be in here for that. But if they ever find out that you discussed something else, if you wandered off track, they're going to say, well, what happened in this closed session? The reason why we have to record what we say is because somebody has to be able to see that we didn't violate the law, that we didn't talk about 3 or 4 other things. So if I'm ever in the closed session, I'm going to probably pop up like a little jack-in-the-box and say, whoa, wait a second, let's stick to what we're talking about. Because you violate Chapter 21 when you go off track.
Now, is that pertaining just to closed sessions or open sessions too, if you go off?
Both an open session as well.
Okay.
Absolutely. If it's not on the agenda, and this is a good one. When you're in I'm glad you pointed that out. When you're in open session, guess what happens in audience comment, right? The person comes up and they say, I live at such and such an address. My name's Mr. Smith. I've got a problem with the sewer in front of my house. They never jet the thing. It never works. It's always backing up. I'm really mad about that. And the next thing you know, it's not on the agenda. You got 4 or 5 council members talking policy. Well, here's what we need to do. We need to go out to that neighborhood and we need to, no. The public was not given notice that the city was going to discuss what to do about its sewer system or whether it will spend money to fix the sewer in a particular area of town. That's what the open meetings law is for. So all you can do is smile politely. The mayor might say, thank you for your comments and we will look into it. And that's all you can do. That's all you can do. Because if it's not,
It's Shane's job to reel us in when we get off, right,
if it's
Shane?
squarely within the agenda, you can talk about it. Like if he says, I noticed tonight you're talking about the sewer on my street, da-da-da-da-da. Well, I'm here to say, this is the open meeting, fine. If you talk about it out of order and you start talking about it then, the mayor might say, well, let's wait till we get to it on the agenda. But if he doesn't, you're not violating the law.
Okay.
But you've got to look to the agenda to make sure it's within the scope of what you gave public notice 24 hours in advance that you were going to discuss. Okay. Because I promised Jim I'd try to be as short as I can. The big issue that I see more of than anything is open meetings violations because of discussion outside the public meeting. There's a case out of Warren County, there's other cases like it, but the Warren County case is very, very instructive. The Supreme Court did some things in that case that scare every city attorney in the whole state. What happened in the Warren County case is the city administrator was working on a major project actually it was a county administrator working on a major project for the county. So what do you imagine she did? She went to each supervisor, in this case it'd be all of you individually, and spoke to them about, and gave them the information they needed, and had a discussion behind closed doors with each of them individually. Thinking, of course, well, that's no quorum, I'm not violating the open meetings law. Well, the Supreme Court said, remanded. That might just be illegal. We remand for further fact-finding on what was discussed in those meetings because we believe there's a high potential, there was a rolling caucus, and an actual meeting took place even though they never all sat in the same room together. And why? because she was passing, allegedly, information from one meeting to another meeting to another meeting to another meeting. It was just like Mayor McCampbell, you know, it'd be just like this. It'd be no different than if Mayor McCampbell decided he wanted something done and he thought something was really important. So he goes to Councilmember Wilson and he says, here's what I think. Here's what I think we need to do. And she says, you know what, I agree. I'm going to vote yes if you bring that up. So then Councilmember Wilson, you know, decides, well, I'm going to go talk to Councilmember Murray about this. As soon as she opens her mouth and Councilmember Murray starts responding, a quorum is now involved, and you're having a public discussion that the newspapers cannot evaluate, right? That's the whole point of a public meeting. Now, is it okay for Jim Furno to send you all a memo on something that's coming up with all the information that you need to consider? Absolutely. It's even okay for him to sit down with you one-on-one, but it gets really scary when he does that. Because it may be perfectly legal. He may just say, look, I don't want you to tell me how you're going to vote. I don't even want you to tell me your opinion, but here's what I got to make sure you understand. And he could do that, okay? But the press doesn't know that's what that discussion was. So I'm just saying, be really, really careful. And, you know, and you're public figures, so if you're sitting in a restaurant and they see you together, they think, what are you guys talking about? Right? You know that's the case. You know, they come up and they see you and they... So the next thing you know, they see you talking to somebody else and you're talking about the same subject because they overheard it and they think there's an open meetings violation going on. Because in the Warren County case, the bad thing that happened was they went to the meeting and there was no discussion, whatever, because they all had it worked out. That's what tipped everybody off and made everybody suspicious. They walked in and they were like, roll call, please. Boom, boom, boom. And it was this major initiative and there was no discussion of it. There was like some very short comments that were made, but it was fairly obvious that there had been discussion outside the meeting. So much discussion, in fact, this very weighty matter didn't even require 4 or 5 sentences out of anybody. So if that happens, you're probably not doing city government right, because you're doing too much of this talking to each other ahead of time.
See, well,
And it's,
no, I hear what you're saying, you're 100%.
Right.
Man, that's just so,
it is, it's difficult.
But here's the thing, though. I remember one time somebody said, well, there was no discussion. How come everybody voted one time? But we had a vote that went down that way. It wasn't a big deal, but we had a vote that went down that way. Well, we had all our discussion the prior meeting at the work session. Everybody already got it out.
Which is
was a
fine.
done deal, was a wrap.
Yeah, which is fine. Absolutely. Because that's what the work session is for, is to hash out and, you all get to
I know, and you get conflicting information. You've been told in the context of time, try to have all your ducks in a row so you're not asking a ton of questions and prolonging everything, so
Yes,
it gets kind of sticky.
yes. And you guys are all highly engaged, and you can tell. But I've seen council members who don't read anything, and they'll spend half an hour of the council time asking all these questions, and, Eric's over there frustrated, and like, why am I having to, I sent a memo, did you read my memo, and, that's, of course, very bad to do also. The city clerk's job, Kathleen's job is much more important than it may seem to those of you just observing her. She is not merely a scrivener. She is doing what Iowa code requires. 21.4 requires meeting notices be sent 24 hours in advance. You should respect what this woman is doing, because you have to do it just right, and the council agenda, she's doing that for a reason. Also, her minutes are vitally critical. They don't have to say every word that you all utter, but they have to be a reasonable description of what happened at our meetings. And if they don't, we're not following the law. And so I just want to give a shout out to the city clerk, who works really, really hard to make sure all these things happen. When you get elected to the office, you don't think about the fact that everything you say, she's literally putting that on paper for you so that there's a record that you said it and that it was important. Public hearings are an issue that, I'm not sure why, but we're very aggressive with public hearings. We seem to set public hearings for absolutely everything here. out of an abundance of caution. And I've sent memos to Jim before about this one, we really actually don't need to. It's fine if you do. I have a list, which if you'd like, I can put that in the handbook, that has all the ordinances that require public hearings and all the resolutions that require public hearings.
Yeah, and this goes to council rules of procedure that were adopted in, I don't know what year. And it came to a surprise to most council members when it was brought up a couple of years ago, that there was such a rule of procedure in place. But that's one that requires that we, by that set of procedures, that we do the public hearing before all ordinances, but that is not a state requirement.
And really, I would like to put it in the council handbook, because you all are really a gatekeeper as well. If we goof something up, if we put something forward and we didn't do a hearing and you see it on the list, you'll have the handbook, and it'll be a good way to remind you, because anybody can say, point of order, Your Honor, I don't think we should do this because we didn't run the public hearing. You can stop everything and go ahead and do it. So, secondly, here's another issue that I think is lost. It doesn't necessarily occur to even attorneys sometimes, but with a small council like this, we have 5 council. It's very hard to pass an ordinance if you're down a council person or a resolution. And I recommend that you never approve contracts without a resolution. Never do them by motion, because you want to have a record of council action stapled to that contract in the city's files, so that we don't have to go hunting through Kathleen's minutes to find out who voted when and whatever it was when we approved a contract that's coming due. You know, because Eric will bring me a contract to say, this thing's coming due, I need you to review it, we don't like it anymore, we'd like to change it, we need this added, this added. You know, and it'd be so much easier if there's always a resolution stapled to it. So, the reason I bring that up is because, obviously, if I have my way, the council will never pass another contract again without a resolution. But ordinances and resolutions require a majority of the entire council. So, what's a majority? If you have 3, you have a quorum, right? But 2 to 1 isn't going to pass an ordinance, is it? So if you got the third reading of an ordinance that you really do want to pass come up, think about that. You've only got 3 council members. It isn't going to pass unless all 3 of you vote yea, because that's the majority of the entire council. You know, and motions, you can pass those all day long with 3, 2 to 1. But state law will not allow you to pass a resolution or an ordinance without a majority of the entire city council voting yea. And I've seen people forget that before, where, now, wait a second, the ordinance fails because we didn't have a full complement on board. Now, I know your wheels are turning. Okay, strategically then, if I need something passed, you know, I got to wait for Smith to be gone, you know.
Start pushing vacations back.
Yes. Talked about rolling caucuses. I'm trying to pick out what I think is absolutely vital from a manual that I was working on. I've been working on it quite a bit. A couple of things. If you are wanting something added to the agenda as a council person, I don't think there's any way a city can function appropriately if a city council member doesn't have the ability to put something on the agenda. The city staff sometimes thinks, oh my gosh, we can't put anything else on, we've got all this other stuff planned, we don't have time, but you have a right to put it on the agenda if you need it on the agenda. If you do that, I'm going to recommend that we adopt a policy that you copy all your colleagues when you do that and put do not reply. Everybody know why? Right? Electronic meetings are also meetings. So that's a good time to point out, when the staff or Mr. Fernless do all council updates on things, never reply. If you reply directly to Jim, that's fine, okay? I got it, or can I confirm the meeting time? But don't engage in discussion over an email. The second you all reply, especially if you reply all, you've got an instant meetings violation. And of course, the Hawkeye, if they make an open records request for all the emails between Jim and the council, they'll find out about that, won't they? And they'll say, whoa, you know, and oftentimes there's no damages, there's nothing that, you know, but they're going to point it out. They're going to point it out because it's their job. They're the press and they watch us, so, and we shouldn't do it.
Shh, the Hawkeye's over there.
Motions. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about. There are a lot of motions that you folks can raise that people don't understand motions very well. How many of you think that you just move to table this if you don't want to talk about it right now? Everybody's probably thought about that or done it at one point or another, right? That might not be quite what you mean. Okay, if you're going to table something, it's just dead until somebody makes a motion to bring it from the table. So if really what you mean is we need another month to study this issue, say, I would like to move to postpone consideration of this matter until our meeting on, and figure out the calendar, and say the date of the calendar date you'd like to move it to. Motion to postpone is different from a motion to lay on the table. And a couple other things, I would hate to think this would ever happen, but sometimes people run on and on and on, right? And it's like you're looking at the clock like you probably are now. It is acceptable, although not always polite, to move the question. If 2/3 of you vote move the question, if let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the mayor says, I moved the previous question on this, and there's a second, and 3 of you vote yes on that, debate ends. There's not, motion to end debate does not have any debate of itself.
That's not 2/3.
So it's just gonna be, yeah, that's right, you're gonna need 4 to end debate. I guess that's right, in Burlington, you're gonna need 4. So, it's not that useful here, because all you need is 2 dissenters, and it's gonna keep carrying on.
Use that if somebody in the audience or one of us
Well,
is
the
just
audience,
getting
the mayor
really-
can control the audience, the mayor
Okay.
can just say, listen, thank you, but you're done.
So we get to squabbling too lengthy ourselves, and then
Correct.
somebody can say, okay, got it.
Correct. You know, and I've seen this work in cases where there's one person who is just hijacked this discussion to the point.
Hey, have you seen that a lot?
Yes. I see it in one particular city twice now, the last 2 meetings in a row.
Really?
Yeah, the person just kept bringing it up, and they were like, I'm tired of this. Your Honor, what can I do? And the mayor says, well, you can move the question. What do you mean? Move to end debate. So he did, and then there was a second, and there was 2/3 voting
That's
yes.
too
and
sweet,
bang,
man.
you guys, they were done. So if you have an annoying individual, and I'm not saying any of you would ever be that.
Can we do that to the city manager? I just want a clarification. Can I do
You
that
may
to
not
Jim?
do
No?
that to the city
All right,
manager.
I just wanted to do a clarification.
You can just tell me to shut up.
Jim.
I'll wait till after the meeting.
Just remember, any type of motion like that is going to require, any motion to limit debate to a certain time frame or whatever is going to require 2/3 for that. That's about all I had. Are there any questions about anything I talked about? We can have another discussion too. I'm working on a draft of upgrade of the existing council handbook, which will have a lot of that stuff from the municipal leaders handbook in it as well. And when you get it, which you'll all get it to review and discuss, we can have another discussion if you would like. Especially if you have thoughts about what should be included that isn't in it.
You covered the good stuff tonight,
Yeah,
Patrick.
this was great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're good, Jim? Anything you want to add on that? All right. Thank you. Make sure we document the time. I want to know how long he's charging us. Thank you, Patrick. All right.
We've got the ride back to cover, too.
Number 2, our treasurer's report. Annette, come on down. I was going to bump up Jason Hutchinson before Annette, but I just thought, I'm not going to do it tonight.
So January's treasurer's report is in the packet. Everything is going along great. There's the normal things that are just timing issues, like our internal service funds and our Mazel project is draws on our SRF loan and things like that. Other than that, the revenues and expenditures are in line with what we would expect them to be at this point. So if anybody has any questions.
I didn't see anything.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Annette, class of 87. We appreciate you. Okay, long-term economic development strategy. Jeremy Hess. And Jason Hutchison. Come on.
Sure, thank you.
This is gonna be a long one.
This is going to be a long one.
This is gonna be a long one.
Good evening, council. My name is Jeremy Hess. I'm the Director of Economic Development Division at the Greater Burlington Partnership. I'll be joined here with my comrade and fearless leader, Jason Hutchison. We were asked to come and give a brief overview of economic development, our efforts, and our strategy going forward. And so just want to thank you for the opportunity to come before you and talk about economic development. Would ask that you please hold all difficult and controversial questions until Jason is up here. Or you can move the question or whatever. You can do that right now if you like. So let's see, I've got to figure this thing out. Hey, there we go, cool. All right, so economic development, I want to talk a little bit about just kind of what it is. Everyone has a different idea of what economic development means or what it is, and so we wanted you to know what economic development means to us at the Greater Burlington Partnership and what we're focused on. So first, let's just talk about the what, and the what in economic development are the priorities. Number one priority is jobs. I hope you all agree that any job is better than no job, but when we talk about jobs, we're talking about good jobs. We're talking about the kind of jobs that you can raise a family on, and you can live your life here in Burlington, Iowa, you can live the American dream. We're talking about primary sector jobs. When we talk about what we're focused on, primary sector jobs, we're not talking about retail, we're not talking about restaurants. There's nothing wrong with the restaurants and retail jobs. There's nothing wrong with those, but we're talking about primary sector jobs. And when we say that, we're talking about those who import dollars into our community and then export a product or a service. So that is my number one goal. That is what our organization has always had as a number one goal, is jobs. And along with that, just as important is investment in growing the tax base. That is our goal. Do not misunderstand me. It's not higher taxes that we're about. We're about growing the tax base. And so we want to make sure that the wealth that is available, that it's not going anywhere else but our town. We want to see as much of it come here as possible. And so that happens through capital investment. We're talking about moving a field that has had a taxable value of $300 or whatever it was for the city, and because it sat there as agricultural or just empty. We'd like to see a $150 million investment on that piece of ground, and that's how we're growing the tax base. So those are our focuses right there, those two things. And so one question might be, how have we done? And how do we measure it, and how do we look at these things? So we've gone back in our results tracker for the last 10 years and looked at how we've done in these two categories. And in the last decade, we've seen job creation of 1,516 jobs, and we've seen up to $347 million in investments. And so remember, when we talk about jobs like this, it may not necessarily be net, but we are talking, so in that last decade, there have been companies that have closed their doors, and we've seen jobs go away. We've seen new companies come along and jobs be added. Again, we're talking about primary sector jobs. We're not talking about retail in here. So we're not talking about restaurants. We're not talking about, these numbers come from what we would classify as a project. If Shears wants to put in $2 million worth of new microwave ovens and add 22 positions to their line, and they had the confidence to pull the trigger on that because we were able to point them towards Alliant Energy rebates or economic development incentives at the state level or whatever, and they move forward with that, we're going to count that. These are things that we've had some involvement in. And listen, I recognize that Jeremy Hess or the economic development, I don't create one job. I don't create any investment. None of these things are coming out of my pocket necessarily. These are private company investments. And they're making the jobs, and they're putting out the dollars. But we do have a role to play in that. So those two things are the what, jobs and growing the tax base. I just wanted to talk briefly about how we do this or how we go about this. One important thing is business attraction. We spend a lot of time pursuing every industry. We pursue site selectors. We hound businesses about their supply chains. We find out who it is that supplies the parts and the nuts and bolts to the cases and the Silgans of this world, and we pursue them. We try and convince them to come and move to Burlington and set up shop right next door. We put together for business attraction, we put together proposals, requests for proposals and so forth that are assembled with excellence, that have every question imaginable.
Did you say that are assembled with excellence?
Yes.
I like that, my friend. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, good.
Assembled with excellence.
But I guess the point is that when it comes to business attraction, everybody thinks their town's the greatest town. We can't just put up a sign up somewhere and they'll just flock here. These things have to be pursued, and we show we show them the answers before they ask the question. Let's talk about business retention. It's another area of how we do and go about economic development. I don't know if this is borne out in our area or not, but the statistics nationwide are that 80% of the growth is going to come from the folks who are already here in our communities. So part of our job and goals and how we do this is that we have a relationship with every single plant manager, every business that we can possibly do, so that we want to know how they're doing. We want to forestall or sidestep any issues. If they're thinking about closing or they're thinking about shrinking, is there ways that we can maneuver and find some state help or some other things to keep that the business from going away or shrinking? Another section or another way that we go about the how in this is real estate and site development. As I said earlier, we can't just put up a sign. We have to have development-ready sites that we control, that we know everything that needs to be known about those sites, and we have to have those ready. If we have no inventory, it's hard to even get into the game of being able to pursue some of these firms that are looking to relocate or expand or grow. Another area that we spend our time on and dollars on is entrepreneurship development. This is a tough one. The goal here is to take the entrepreneurial spirit in this town and grow it. I don't know how some towns just seem to have a knack for it, whether it's Iowa City or Fairfield, but we'd like to see that happen here. We'd like to see more of the wine guards, people starting in their garage or the KPIs, and find those folks that have a great idea and nurture them and help them and grow them so that they might be an economic engine and an employer in our town. Another area that we put a lot of effort into is talent attraction and workforce development. Jason's going to talk about workforce talent attraction portion of it, but you know, a lot of this sometimes gets to be the chicken or the egg. We don't know, which needs to happen first. So right now our labor market is very tight. I don't know exactly what our unemployment rate is, but it's in the mid threes or maybe the low 3-point-something%. But it's tight out there. I think if you went and talked to most HR managers in our community, they would tell you that they have multiple openings and cannot find trained personnel. And so it makes business attraction more difficult if that company's doing due diligence and they get on the phone, they talk to 4 other HR managers who are all ready to leave town and never look back because their job is very, very difficult right now. That makes business attraction even that more difficult. So there's a great deal of effort and time put put into workforce development. These are working with the schools, putting schools and businesses together, along with community college, and what are the things that we need to do to move our kids from school to work as fast as possible. It's apprenticeships, it's all kinds of things like that. So it's just, it's a tough balance to walk. Moving on here, I wanted to talk just a little bit about one of the things that we do at the Partnership and Economic Development and Site Selection process. And just for the record, I'll have you know, I'm new in this position, only been in this job for almost 1 year. And I can tell you that there's more activity, there are more proposals that are out there on my board in the last month than I've seen in the last 6 or 7 months combined. So something is changing, or there's been an uptick in activity, and most of these companies that are evaluating Burlington or asking if there's any interest here at all use what's called a site selector. These are people who are hired who essentially, I'll get to it's actually second point, is that they are hired to eliminate as many people as quickly as possible. That's kind of their goal. Competition is high for these kinds of projects out there. You guys got to know that. You got to know that the town 50 miles up the road wants one of these projects to land here just as bad or worse than you. And so out of 250 people that are towns that are putting forth proposals, the job of the site selector is to quickly get that list to as small as possible. And so they're looking for any reason to cut your town. There are things that matter in site selection that we and you, as we partner together, have a lot to do with, whether it's the economics. They'll look at the economics. Does it make sense for them to locate here? What kind of a business climate does Burlington have? Are they pro-business, or are they friendly towards business? How are we doing on infrastructure? Are we looking towards the future? Are we behind? They'll look at all of those things, and all of those things matter. But the key to the site selector's heart, or whatever, is risk reduction. They want to know that what we say we're going to do, we can deliver on, that every possible scenario that they can think of that make our town a problem for this project or for that site location has been handled. And so in the past, I would just point to my predecessor, Mr. Toyer, who did an excellent job, along with some of you here on council and other people in this room, that when the Silgan location took a look at Burlington, when they showed up for a site visit, they didn't just show up and take them out to a nice dinner and try and ply them with alcohol or whatever. They showed up and they had every department from the city here. They had the wastewater treatment guys, they had the water treatment guys, they had the city engineers, they had the code enforcement people there. So when that site selector showed up and they started firing questions, we had answers. And this is the level of excellence that we want to continue with as we move forward in the future. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my boss.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. Jason Hutchison. We can't have a talk about economic development without at least discussing incentives. And I know that trash cans can be very controversial, but so can incentives. And you'll know that, especially when there's a project underway and you hear about that. And I would say there are no easy solutions to that. But I think a lot of times incentives there are misconceptions out there in the general public about incentives in terms of who wants anything gets it, and that's not the case. In fact, we actually use incentives very rarely. They aren't used that often, and when they are, it's designed to be specific and strategic about encouraging a specific type of investment, and not all jobs are incentivized, but typically there's some sort of a threshold in terms of the wage that's paid and the benefits to those in which an incentive gets attached to it. But then there's also an accountability piece. There's also a thought that incentives just get awarded, companies get a big check, and then that's it. They cash the check and then they don't create the jobs. Or when a month after a job's created, they decide to fire that individual. And that's not the the case. Now, these things do go by head count, so you might encounter thoughts from citizens that say, I was hired and then I was let go and they still got the money. But what we talk about is total head count. It matters less what the Social Security number is of the person doing that job and more what's the total level of employment, because people are always going to come in and out of an organization. So I would tell you that out of all the things in my job, wrestling with this concept of incentives is the thing that takes up the most bandwidth up here, and we're very cautious in coming to you and proposing those things because they're not easy to do. And I would say it is important to have public feedback on that, because the public does help keep us in check and keep us accountable on those things. Just some future ideas to float out there when it relates to economic development. Here we talk about the need for inventory in industrial land. And you can take industrial to mean manufacturing. You can take industrial to also mean office. It just in general, the inventory for space for primary sector companies. Flint Ridge Business Park was a great project that was christened a little over 25 years ago. And that started out at 315 acres. Significantly under 100 acres right now, and so 2/3 of that, more than 2/3 of that, has been developed. And so, as we look for increasing our industrial capacity in the future, unfortunately, infrastructure has risen in cost fairly dramatically since the early 90s, and so we're trying to be very strategic. I don't think you're going to see another 300-acre industrial park pop up in and around our community. I think the cost of land acquisition, the cost of infrastructure are probably going to be too significant for that. And so what we're looking at is perhaps smaller parcel development and those sorts of things that we can take from existing infrastructure and have those extension costs be as minimal as possible. The other thing to consider in the future is the expansion of Highway 61 and 34. Right now, it's likely that Highway 61 is going to be completed 4-lane all the way through by 2029. That's a long way off. Hopefully, we can move up that time frame. But the good news is it's on the radar. That hadn't always been the case. In fact, before the gas tax was passed, we had no real clear idea of when that might happen. So the team is fairly committed to making that happen. We've learned we can't influence politics across the river in Illinois. I don't know when 34 is going to be done, but I'll tell you, it would be very helpful when that would happen, because anytime trucks touch a 2-lane road or their speed is interrupted, their consistent flow of traffic is interrupted, that increases the cost of transportation. And a lot of times RFPs that we receive, the companies will want to have a certain mile radius of an interstate system. And although we may be outside of those parameters from an interstate radius, we can sometimes argue that if we've got a divided 4-lane highway without stoplights, that is just as good as an interstate. We have that on 34 from here to one. All the communities have signed a pact saying they're not going to put stoplights on there until really you reach the school in the Des Moines area, and that's been pretty helpful. We'd certainly like to see that going east as well. And then last thing, Jeremy already mentioned it, but talent attraction. We're currently limited in our community by our capacity to do economic development deals for the reason of talent acquisition and talent development here. And as proof of that, what I would offer is a job a bank, SEIowajobs.com. You can go on there at any point in time and click on Iowa Workforce Development, and you're going to see in real time updates on jobs on that site. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, there were 1,060 advertised job openings. So that does not include the company that might hire folks but hasn't advertised it yet. These are advertised listings, and oftentimes what I hear when I use that number is, well, these are all minimum wage jobs. Isn't that wonderful that we have 1,000 minimum wage jobs open? And I will tell you, and I didn't selectively pick this. All I did was click from the website the today at the top of that, and you can see superintendent, management, there's a medical job there, quality control manager. So while there certainly would be some minimum wage jobs in this 1,000 pool, there are also many jobs that pay significantly more than that listed in this. And this is not just Burlington, West Burlington, this is our labor shed area. So typical driving commute from our community is included in that. But we've got to get really serious as a community about attracting talent and then developing talent within, because that 1,000 number has been pretty consistent for a period of time. And I will tell you, we need HR people to be our advocates in companies on creating jobs here. And right now, some of them are saying, please don't send any new jobs here because I already can't fill the ones that we have. And we should never lose a job opportunity because we can't fill it. That's a horrible reason to not have economic development deals happen here. Last things to consider, and then I'll leave you for the evening, but it's important for us to be visible on confronting our challenges. Jeremy talked about risk reduction and how that is really important. I got into this business thinking the bottom line is the only thing that mattered, and while the bottom line is important, people, humans, make decisions on where to put corporate investment, and we can be risk averse when it's our tail on the line and making a recommendation. It's important for those folks making the decisions to know that as a community we're proactively tackling our challenges. And perceptions related to crime, our aging infrastructure is a concern. The debt that the city has certainly is a concern. And so all those things, I think, are great strategies being put in place to tackle that. But I would say we shouldn't just shy away from problems because they're difficult. In fact, it's important for us to be visible on those things. There are some existing incentive programs out there I think that would be helpful to review, and I know that we intend to meet with the Sales Tax Economic Development Group and committee that you have as a city committee. There's a Sales Tax Economic Development Fund that's been established for a long time. The city's not funding that to the degree that it had in the past, and so I think we want to be fairly particular about some parameters for accessing those dollars, because economic development can mean lots of things to lots of people, and perhaps it'd be wise to narrow in that focus a little bit for those limited dollars. Housing is something I will not leave you alone about. When we talk about talent and when we talk about the wealth of a community, housing is so important around that. We know demographics. If we just look at demographics, we know that we're getting older, and we know that as we skew older, we're probably likely to move from earned income to fixed income, and that will have an impact on the wealth of our community. And so, of course, if it's me putting the lens on, I hope that every decision that you consider in the future, it's in the minds of, will this help us attract working families to our community or not? When we think about the talent development and the number of unfilled positions out there, this becomes pretty important. And people vote with their feet on where to go. And housing is important. There are stories every day of people accepting employment in our community, but perhaps living elsewhere or having long commutes. And so supply of housing units it's pretty darn important. And we're not in an island. We're competing globally for talent, and everyone's got to have a place to live. And so I'm going to keep pushing you on housing to have a strong strategy as a community for how we're going to get that, because we work really, really hard on economic development deals. And if we don't also follow that up with housing, then we're not capturing the entire piece of the pie that we would like to do. Because at the end of the day, we want those people in our community so that they can pay taxes here and help add to the tax base here. All right, enough of my lecture on housing. Stable and predictable government. Good night for your presentation tonight, by the way. This does not mean that you can never have disagreement. But when we talk about risk reduction, it's pretty important for the business community when they're taking a look at where to have a long-term investment, that they're stable and predictable government. Government agencies get along with one another, they work with one another, and council bodies have vision for the future and approach problems in a very predictable manner. We may not always know the outcome, but that they at least approach problems with a process in a predictable manner. And then finally, I know budgets are always tough, but we must think about ongoing investment of quality in life initiatives. We can always delay things for a few years, but delay quality in life initiatives for decades would be problematic. And so I'm not suggesting that we've done that here, but I just want to put that in front of you as we talk about talent attraction, that we can't forget about those things either. So this is not really some grand plan that we unveiled for you tonight. We are working on our new 5-year plan of work, our 5-year strategy governing 2019 to 2023 in terms of how the partnership approach economic development. But I at least wanted to lay the groundwork and give you some nuggets to chew on. Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys have questions? I'll tell you what, for the next 5 years, anything like the last 5 will be doing pretty good.
Thanks.
All right. So if it's not, I'm gonna blame Jeremy. Yes. All right, good job, guys. Does anybody have any problems with appointments?
Well, it was a little confusing. The headline was for low rent housing, but the application was for animal
It was
control board.
it was a prior application that I told her she didn't have to worry about refilling out.
No?
I didn't see any issue.
Okay. All right, then. Mr. Tislin, before you go off the reservations, you got anything you want to say?
Just one thing I think you might have been emailed on, just the state historic tax credits that's being considered as reducing and eliminating over time by July 2025, phasing that completely out, which would be to downtown. That's been critical in the redevelopment of a lot of buildings downtown, so I think that's being discussed and has been discussed, so I'd urge you to contact legislatures on that and advocate for that as much as we can, because we have a lot of buildings that, if they're not redeveloped at some point, then we're looking at demolition or a lot of cost for the city to maintain those over time if someone walks away from them, so I think that's it.
Okay. Counselor?
Went to a wonderful concert last weekend at the Capitol, and if you weren't there, you really missed out. It was country western, a lot of local talent. In fact, there was a gal that started everybody off, Megan Smith. She accomplished it on guitar in 6 months, what took me 6 years. So there was some talent on the stage. There's a nice book signing coming up at Burlington by the Book this Saturday, and it escapes me. It's a native Burlingtonian is returning back, and she'll be signing her book, and I intend to be there. Sounds really good.
Counselor, Mr. Phillips.
Free shed. You might hear about it on the radio. We've got a bunch of dead fish down at the marina, freshly frozen dead fish, but eventually they're going to start stinking up the joint. So
He's actually eating it. His wife hasn't figured out it's not sushi yet.
No. Please come get some free fish, all you fishermen. Thanks.
I just
Sushi bar.
just want to give my condolences to the Clegg family, and also to the Heinold family as well. Also, just want to, this is where, since we're done with budget season, I'm going to be ramping up this next month and a half. So if there are any teachers that want me to come in and do a reading before I shut it off again, now's the time, so I'm taking all comers. Call Kathleen Salisbury or Katie Music, and they'll be able to get it set up. So,
I've got nothing today.
what? Oh, think about it.
throat.
Yeah.
Okay, Counselor, Mr. Rinker.
I have nothing.
He's got nothing. James, welcome back to America.
Backfill is up for discussion. Actually, it is scheduled for a subcommittee meeting tomorrow at 4 o'clock. The bill that is as currently written would cut a third of that next year. The general fund, that would be $115,000. It would cut another third the following year and none. So it's a two-year phase out. If that were to go through as it is currently being addressed, this is at the same time that we're talking already about being in a financially stressed position, especially that second year and the end of the third year out. So making sure your voice is heard and understanding what kind of impact this can have on us locally is tremendous. Flood wall. I do have something, Nick. I'm putting you on the spot. I heard something about. What, in regards to the flood wall, where are things at and what are our abilities to meet the needs for Steamboat Days this year?
Oh, gotcha. We're on schedule currently, but that could change with any minute. The schedule on the contract, there was some extra working days because of the switch in the form liners used for the concrete wall. That's just a working date number, that's not a construction date deadline. But that does push that working date deadline to 6/12, which is 3 days before, or 2 days before their first concert. That wouldn't work. I mean, we would have to try and accommodate to a certain level. I know that has been published that they have what, quote, the green light, or that we are willing to work with them in the final stages. That's true, but the final stages have not been defined on what we are willing to do. I'm not going to completely halt the project if it's not at its final stages. And Steamboat Days is well aware of my stance on this project. It could be set off by the river level shot up here in the last week up to about 14 foot. If it gets to about 17 foot this spring, I would be concerned that some of the contractors would start pulling materials, and that could greatly delay us getting it done on time. But we should be able to have Steamboat Days, I mean, all assuming that the schedule goes forward as is, but it will be dialed back. We haven't had some of those in-depth conversations yet as to what that means. We're not quite on that moment of that conversation. I think the next month will be pretty telling on where we will be at that moment, just because there's a lot of concrete work that has to happen in between then, and once that concrete work is done, we should be able to operate even if there is some sort of a smaller level of flood threat. If we get a full 500-year flood, we should be able to sustain to at least 20-foot level.
So I just wanted to make sure there was a clarification in terms of what we are able to provide based off of what I've seen in the paper. Just want to make sure that we do know we're doing everything that we can, but there are no guarantees when you're in the middle of a project and you just don't know how the last couple months are going to turn out.
Water's going down though now, you're okay.
Yeah, it'd be below 12 by Sunday, but
Yeah, you'll be fine now.
until we get all the rains this March.
And I noticed there's been discussions about parking. Our parking fund has brought in, just kind of historically, in 2012, our parking fund sat with a $253,000 deficit. And we were bringing in $57,000 of revenue in 2012, and our expenditures that year were $72,000. There was nothing out of the ordinary for the expenditures. We were doing a great job of having a system set up to maximize loss, and it just accumulated and was part of an overall process of having deficits in a multitude of areas. The money that we spend in a parking, we kind of talked about the last meeting, and in the meantime, from what I've seen, Vicky's position and what she does with making sure that we have parking enforcement occur in the downtown area is covered out of that. We also do basic maintenance of the facility, cleaning. The property maintenance has to go through and clean up spots, lights, and do just basic upkeeps. And that is what, when you look at our expenditures, anywhere from 60 to 80,000, depending on how much property maintenance expenditures occur. That is the basic cost to maintain our parking system, how we currently operate. 2013 into 14, we did a significant increase in what our parking rates were for leased spaces. That was enough to get us up over the hump so that we weren't operating at a deficit out of that fund, and it created a little bit of positive cash flow. And it transferred over the course of years $180,000 over into that fund to get rid of the deficits that had accumulated over a number of years. Absent, if there hadn't been a 200 and what grew by the end of, actually by the end of 2012, it was 270,000 in deficit. If we hadn't had to deal with that kind of a deficit in that account, we'd have been able to, that fund wouldn't be providing like a significant amount to do towards capital improvements to the parking lots, but it would be contributing some, at least, to help pay for those type of improvements with the rates that we have in place. Just what's in there. When you have deficits in accounts, you end up collecting money with no benefit that you get to see. And that's what we've dealt with over the course of the last 5 years. It's not just here, it's in a lot of different places. And you just have to remember that that's kind of what the position is for him. I don't know if that clears up things.
Glad you brought that up.
But I do, just based off of what I'd read in the article and knowing how some of the conversations have gone, I just wanted to try to make sure that there's a little bit more out there to give some context, especially for people who haven't been a part of this process over the course of the last few years.
Thank you.
And that's it for what I have.
So Wednesday and Thursday of last week, Linda and I attended the legislative forum for Southeast Iowa Days in Des Moines with Nick McGregor. There's a lot of great information out there. We were able to meet the economic development director for the state of Iowa, several lobbyists, different people that are working in order to improve our area. So there's a lot of going on. There's a lot of people pulling for us and pushing to make sure that we can improve our community. And then on Friday, I went up to Davenport with Charlie Nichols and Matt Amna, the city nuisance and rental inspector. And we sat down with their rental and nuisance team and spent the whole day of learning about what they do and trying to figure out what we can do better. One of the things we talked about up there was parking, and they've adopted a few things and bought some programs and made some minor investment, capital investment into their procedures. And over the last couple of years, they've actually seen an increase in their overall revenue, and now they're profitable. They're making money in their parking programs, and there's a lot of things that we can do that would just make it more efficient. Rental programs that they have, and we're going to be probably traveling to other communities. I think Dubuque is one that we're working to get to. I think Ottumwa's on the list. So as we move forward, we got a lot of great information to bring forward. So just want to bring that up.
Good deal. Anything you want to share from the trip?
I got cut short, unfortunately, because the weather was not cooperative. So right when we got to the questions for the cities, they said we're calling in, unfortunately. But it was a good opportunity to network with your legislators and elected officials and get your questions answered. And to contact your elected officials about the backfill historic tax credits, please do so, because could be some nasty stuff coming down the pipes if it doesn't go in our way.
Have we sent a letter about the historic tax credits? I thought we discussed that once before. Have we sent one as a city?
We did on, that was federal.
That was the federal.
Federal and those ended up not being cut during their process.
Okay.
Patrick O., he ain't heavy, but he's my attorney. You got anything you want to close out with?
No, thank you.
We're good to go? Okay, then. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.